Well, we fled Vienna in 1938 after Kristallnacht and made our way to Belgium. And then the war caught up with us on May 10th, 1940. And my mother and I lived under the occupation. My father was taken away the same day the war started, and so he was in French camps for 2 years in the Pyrenees and then was sent east. In 1943, when things were really getting bad, the underground hid me in a Catholic school in the Ardennes forest. The Ardennes forest of Belgium near Luxembourg. It was a Catholic school. There were 125 boys in the school, and I had to pass for both Belgian and Catholic, which was an interesting endeavor since I had no idea as to what Catholic meant, and since everything religious was done in Latin. So I had to learn a new language, a new religion, and a new way of behaving. It was extremely rigorous, religiously speaking. We had 3 nuns and 2 priests that came and went. One in particular really took care of us, Father Hardy, who taught us religion and catechism and tried to make good Catholics out of us. After my initial experience with confession, I became an altar boy, and for the 2 years that I spent at the school, I served Mass every morning, which in retrospect was quite a feat since I really didn't know what I was doing, but I obviously learned very quickly. I spent time crying myself to sleep at night, but during the day I was supposed to be this happy-go-lucky 10-year-old Belgian kid having fun with his friends, and very proud to be an altar boy and very proud to be on friendly terms with the priest and the teachers, who were wonderful young people. And aside from constantly wondering what was happening to my parents and the rest of my family, it was not an unhappy time. It was unhappy when I stopped to think, and it was not unhappy if I just went along with what was going on. And that's how time passed. As I said once before, I had to learn to tell little white lies, because the boys would say, "Hey Paul, how come you never get any mail?" for instance. You know, or when they asked questions about my parents, I had to make things up, what they did and where they lived and so forth, and which is really an amazing situation as I think about it today. And how that little 10-year-old kid who was being torn apart inside was able to pretend like this and live like that for 2 years. It's really, to me, it's really amazing what a 10-year-old child can accomplish. Of course, we weren't really children, you know. Our age was not equal to how we had to behave. A wartime is anything but natural. I was fully aware of the fact that if I were caught as a Jew, that the 124 other boys and the 30 teachers would have to suffer my fate. And that's a heavy responsibility for those little shoulders, really. And of course I was absolutely convinced that I was the only Jewish boy at the school. There just was no indication that anybody else was. And as I found out in 1988, when I was invited to a reunion at the school, I found out that, as the figure stands today, at 87 Jewish boys out of the 125, which in and of itself is also a miraculous figure and situation. That my godmother, the principal of the school, and I call her my godmother because I was baptized and she became my godmother. How she managed that and how she was willing to accept so many Jewish children to hide and to save, one at a time, is again extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. And we were liberated in October of 1944 by the American forces, infantry, who came into our village and took care of the Germans, and within a few hours we were free. I think I can still feel how wonderful that felt and how elated I was, because to be, by now of course I was 11, this 11-year-old kid really, in a way naively but optimistically, thought that everything would be set right now since the war was going to be over soon. We were free, the war was still going on, and so I was extremely anxious to make my way back to Brussels to see if I could find my mother. And my godmother allowed me to do that. She let me leave, so I just one day took off from the school and made my way from the Ardennes all the way to the capital. And walking the streets in my neighborhood, I actually ran into my mother, walking the other way. And after the screams of joy and the tears and the hugs, my mother said, "Now we can wait for Papa's return together." As I said earlier, everyone was naive enough at the beginning to think that the people who had disappeared would magically reappear. Unfortunately, it was not so. The details I found out in 1988 when I went back for a reunion of the Jewish boys of the school, which at first I thought would be a reunion of myself with myself, which did not really excite me. 43 of the boys showed up at that reunion in 1988. It was an incredible few days, and among other things, of course, there were some of the people who had belonged to the underground, who had helped save boys and girls during the war, were present at this reunion, and one of them encouraged me to look into the archives, the Belgian archives, to find out if I had in fact been hidden by the same underground cell. And so I went to the archives, and upon researching the notebooks of the underground, did find that I had been. My name was there, and my code number and so forth. And while I was looking at this and shedding a few tears, the archivist produced my father's dossier, and that's when I found out what had happened to him.